One mother, one child, and absolutely nothing left. That night, Emily Carter sat at a flooded bus stop without enough money to buy a meal, without a single place left to go. She had lost her job, lost her home, lost everything, in the span of 7 days. And the 5-year-old girl sitting beside her was trembling from the cold, asking a question Emily had no answer for. "Mommy, where are we sleeping tonight?" This is the story of a rainy night that changed 4 lives forever. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And stay until the very end. You won't regret it. The rain had been falling since 4 in the afternoon. By 7 o'clock it wasn't raining anymore. It was attacking. Thick, merciless sheets of water hammered the pavement of downtown Millbrook, turning gutters into rivers and driving everyone with any sense indoors. The few people still out moved fast, heads down, collars pulled up, desperate to get somewhere warm and dry. Emily Carter was not moving at all. She sat on the single wooden bench inside the Delwood Avenue bus shelter, her spine curved forward like something inside her had quietly given up. Her jacket, a gray zip-up she'd owned since college, fraying at the cuffs, was soaked through across the shoulders. The shelter had a roof, technically, but one of the side panels had been missing for months, and the wind kept throwing rain in sideways, catching her left cheek and arm no matter which way she turned. Sophie sat pressed against her mother's side, both small legs dangling off the edge of the bench. She had her face half buried in Emily's ribs and was wearing the plastic rain poncho they'd grabbed from a dollar rack outside a convenience store 3 hours ago. It was yellow, cartoon fish printed on it, comically cheerful against the gray-wet misery of the night. One of the armholes had already started tearing at the seam. Sophie was 5 years old. She didn't fully understand what was happening. That was the only mercy left. Emily understood every single piece of it. What? 7 days ago, she had been fired from the Bluebell Diner on Route 9. Not dramatically. No shouting, no confrontation. Her manager, a stocky man named Dennis with a permanent coffee stain on his apron and very little patience for inconvenience, had called her into the back room on a Tuesday morning and told her, in a flat, efficient voice, that he was letting her go. "You've missed too many shifts, Em. I tried to work with you, but I've got a business to run." "She was sick, Dennis. She's 5. I had nobody to watch her." "I know." He'd looked genuinely sorry for about 3 seconds. "I really do, but I can't hold the position. I've got people waiting." She'd driven home in silence, sat in the parking lot of their apartment building for 20 minutes before she could make herself go inside. The next blow had come faster than she expected. She was already 2 months behind on rent when the diner job disappeared. She'd been managing, barely, painfully, with the precision of someone doing financial surgery with a butter knife, by picking up extra catering shifts and selling things she didn't need on a secondhand app. Her phone, a camera she'd bought herself for her 25th birthday, a small collection of paperback nursing textbooks she'd been holding onto for years, telling herself she'd go back someday. When the catering shifts dried up and the diner income evaporated, the math became impossible. Her landlord, Mr. Pratt, was not a cruel man. He was just a man who owned 6 rental units and couldn't afford sentiment. He'd knocked on her door on a Thursday evening, hat literally in hand, and told her he'd given her every extension he could. "I've got a family waiting on this unit, Emily. I held off as long as I could." She had 12 days to vacate. She'd spent those 12 days in a controlled kind of panic, calling every number she had, filling out forms online, sitting on hold with the housing assistance line for so long that Sophie learned the hold music and started humming it. She'd called her mother in Shreveport. Her mother, who had her own troubles and a voice that always managed to make Emily feel like her problems were a personal failing, had offered $60 and a 15-minute lecture about financial responsibility. She'd called her friend Donna, who had a 2-bedroom in Crestview and a genuinely warm heart. Donna had a new boyfriend who'd just moved in. "I want to help, I swear, but it's complicated right now, Em. I'm sorry." Everyone was sorry. Nobody had a spare room. By the 12th day, Emily had $43 in her checking account, a duffel bag with everything that mattered, and Sophie's backpack stuffed with her daughter's most important things: a stuffed rabbit named Captain Flop, a change of clothes, her favorite book about a girl who could talk to fish. She'd left the key on the kitchen counter and walked out without looking back. If she looked back, she would fall apart, and she could not afford to fall apart. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She had taken Sophie on 2 buses, heading toward the east side of town where she'd heard there was a family shelter. The shelter, she discovered when she arrived, had a 6-week wait list and no immediate openings. The woman at the desk had been kind. She'd given Emily a printed list of other options, circled 3 names in pen, and said she was sorry. 3 options. 2 were full. The third didn't take children under 7, which was how Emily Carter, 30 years old, former diner waitress, former nursing student, current holder of absolutely nothing, ended up at the Delwood Avenue bus shelter at 7:15 on a Thursday evening in November, sitting in the sideways rain with her daughter asleep against her side. She had nowhere to go. She had $16 left, and she was trying, with everything she had, not to cry in front of her daughter. Sophie stirred, lifted her head, blinking, her dark curls flattened on one side where she'd been pressed against Emily's arm. "Mommy? Hey, Bug, you okay? I'm cold." "I know." Emily pulled her closer, rubbing Sophie's arm through the poncho. "The bus will come soon." It was a lie. She wasn't waiting for a bus. She had nowhere for a bus to take her. She was sitting here because the bench was dry adjacent, and she didn't know what else to do. Sophie looked up at her with those wide, dark eyes that saw too much. "Are you sad?" Emily's throat tightened. "I'm just tired." "Your face looks sad." "My face is cold. That's just what cold looks like on me." Sophie considered this with the gravity of a 5-year-old processing uncertain information. Then she reached up and put her small hand flat against Emily's cheek. "I'll warm it up," she said simply, like that would fix everything. Emily pressed her own hand over Sophie's and held it there. She kept her eyes very still, focused on a crack in the pavement across the street, and breathed slowly. In through her nose, out through her mouth. The way she used to practice when she was a nursing student learning about managing anxiety. Back when she was someone who was going to be a nurse. Back when she had a plan, and the plan had a future. She was so far from that person now, she could barely remember what she'd felt like. Pashuki? The black SUV pulled up to the curb at 7:22. It was a clean, expensive vehicle. The kind where even the wipers looked like they cost more than Emily's monthly grocery budget. It double parked in front of the shelter, hazards blinking amber in the rain. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's side door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall. Not in an imposing, broad-shouldered way, just genuinely tall, with the kind of build that suggested someone who used to play sports in college and still occasionally remembered how. He was wearing a dark wool coat, charcoal gray, the collar turned up against the wind. He wasn't running, wasn't hunching. He moved through the rain like it was a minor inconvenience he'd decided not to engage with emotionally. He stopped at the curb and looked at his phone, then up at the street sign, then back at his phone, like he'd typed in the wrong address and was doing quiet math about it. Emily barely noticed him. She was looking at Sophie, who had fallen back asleep against her arm, the yellow poncho rising and falling slowly. Then she heard a sound she wasn't expecting. Small footsteps. Running. She looked up just in time to see a boy, maybe 6 years old, in a red raincoat with the hood up, come sprinting around the back of the SUV, skid on the wet pavement, and grab the rear door handle to catch himself before he wiped out completely. "Noah!" The man's voice was sharp but controlled. Not angry, just the voice of a parent who has said this name in this tone approximately 10,000 times. "What did I say? Don't get out of the car without telling you." The boy, Noah, said it in the exact rhythm of a sentence he'd memorized under duress. Then he looked up at the man with an expression of absolute unrepentance. "But I got bored." "You were bored for 4 minutes." It was a long 4 minutes. The man pinched the bridge of his nose briefly, then looked up at the shelter. That was when he saw them. Emily didn't notice at first. She was watching Sophie sleep, running her thumb in small circles over the back of her daughter's hand, doing the only thing she could do, which was be physically present when everything else was gone. But Sophie woke up again. Kids always did, at the worst moments. She lifted her head, blinked twice, and looked at Noah, who was standing at the edge of the shelter now, staring at her with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned that staring was impolite. Sophie stared back. "Hi," Noah said. "Hi," Sophie said. A beat. Why are you sitting in the rain? Noah asked. We're not in the rain, Sophie said, with a precision that was deeply her mother's daughter. We're in the thing that blocks the rain. It's still raining on your arm, Noah pointed out. Sophie looked at her arm, looked back at Noah. I know. Noah seemed to find this acceptable. He sat down on the far end of the bench with the casual authority of a child who sits wherever he wants. His father had stepped under the edge of the shelter roof now, close enough that Emily became aware of him, tall, standing straight, not hovering, but present. She looked up. He was younger than she'd expected for someone with that car. Early 30s, maybe. Dark eyes, a little tired, clean-shaven. He had a quality she couldn't immediately name. Not warmth, exactly, not coldness. More like someone who had learned to keep most of himself below the surface and got very good at it. He looked at her. Not in a way that made her feel examined, just in a way that saw her. I'm sorry, he said. He moves fast. It's okay. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. She hadn't spoken to an adult in hours. He nodded at the bench. Mind if I stand here a minute? My rideshare app is... He held up his phone in a gesture of exhausted resignation. Sure. He leaned against the side panel, typing something with one thumb, other hand in his coat pocket. Rain hammered the roof. Sophie had started asking Noah quiet questions about his red coat and whether it was waterproof on the inside too, and Noah was answering with the detailed seriousness of a child who takes coat-related questions very seriously. Emily sat very still. She was aware suddenly of how she must look. Hair plastered flat, mascara she'd forgotten she was even wearing, probably smeared somewhere, jacket soaked through, bag at her feet with a broken zipper held shut with a binder clip. She looked at a woman who had run out of road. She hated that. She hated that more than the cold. Daddy, Noah said. His father was still on his phone. How come they're sitting here? Noah, they've been here a long time. Noah said it as a statement of fact with no particular weight behind it. The lady looks really tired. Buddy, she was crying before, Sophie said quietly. Emily went completely still. She looked at her daughter. Sophie said it the way children say true things, without cruelty, without drama, just reporting what she'd observed. She was looking at her mother now, with those wide, honest eyes. I wasn't, Emily started. A little bit, Sophie said softly. But it's okay, Mommy. I know you're scared. Emily's throat locked. She pressed her lips together and looked down at her hands. The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt like longer. She heard the man put his phone away. I'm Ethan, he said. She looked up. Brooks? He said his last name without any particular emphasis. The way someone says their last name when they're used to it meaning things they don't particularly want it to mean in a moment like this. And that's Noah. He is 5.5, and he has no concept of private conversation. I'm practicing my observing, Noah clarified. Something shifted in Emily's face. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, brief and involuntary. Emily and Sophie. Ethan crouched down so he was at Noah's eye level, which incidentally put him closer to where Sophie was sitting. He looked at Sophie directly when he spoke, which not many adults bothered to do. Where are you guys headed tonight? He asked. He asked it like it was a simple question, like the answer might just be home and they were waiting on the 7:45s. And Emily opened her mouth. She'd gotten very good over the past year at constructing functional lies. We're fine. Just waiting for a friend. Our ride is coming. Lies that preserve dignity. Lies that move the conversation somewhere safer. But she was so tired. She was so profoundly, bone-deep tired of everything, including the lies. I don't know, she said. Ethan didn't react with pity. He didn't recoil. He just held her gaze steadily and waited, in the way of someone who understood that sometimes the truest answer to a question is the one you've been refusing to say out loud. We were trying to get to a shelter, she said, but they were full. I've been trying to figure out the next move. How long have you been here? Since about 5. His expression shifted in a way she couldn't fully read. Something behind the eyes. Not sympathy exactly. Something older than that. More personal. It's almost 7:30, he said. I know. A pause. He straightened up. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the rain, then back at Emily. And she could see him making a decision, the internal calculation of it, the brief hesitation. Before he said, "There's a hotel 2 blocks from here. The Alderton. Do you know it?" "I know where it is." She'd walked past it 100 times. It had a doorman and a lobby with marble floors and a restaurant on the ground level that always smelled like butter and garlic when she passed. "I'd like to get you and Sophie a room," Ethan said. "Just for tonight, and dinner." Emily stared at him. "I'm not—" She stopped, started again. "I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "You don't. I can't just—" "I understand." He said it without defensiveness, without rushing her. "I'm not going to push. I'll call the car again and we'll go." He looked at Sophie briefly. "But my son is about to fall asleep standing up, and I have a feeling your daughter hasn't eaten in a while, and it's going to rain like this until morning." Emily looked at Sophie. Sophie was watching her with that quiet, trusting attention. "Whatever you decide, Mommy, I'm with you." Emily's jaw tightened. She looked back at Ethan. "Why?" she said. Came out harder than she meant. "Why would you do this for 2 strangers?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, considering. "Because someone did it for me once," he said, "when I needed it and couldn't have asked." It wasn't the whole answer. She could tell that, but it was a real one. Sophie decided for both of them. She climbed down from the bench, walked up to Ethan with the directness of a child who hasn't yet learned to be afraid of the wrong things, and looked up at him. "Is the hotel nice?" she asked. Ethan looked down at her. "It has a room service menu with chocolate chip pancakes." Sophie turned back to her mother with an expression of absolute clarity. "Mommy," she said, "I think we should go." It didn't. The Alderton Hotel was exactly as warm and clean and mercilessly comfortable as Emily had always imagined when she walked past it. The lobby had that particular smell of expensive hotels, something lightly floral, something cedar adjacent, the deep quiet of a place where carpets are thick enough to absorb sound. Emily walked in with her damp duffel and her daughter and her binder-clipped bag, feeling like she'd stepped across a border into a different country. The woman at the front desk greeted Ethan by name. He'd called ahead from the car, a brief, quiet phone call, just an address and a room type and a request to add a cot. No elaboration. He'd sat in the front with the driver, leaving the back seat to Emily and Sophie and Noah, who'd fallen into the easy chatter of children who meet in circumstances without the social anxiety adults bring to strangers. Emily sat watching the city go by in the window, wet and dark and amber-lamped, and tried to understand what was happening. She wasn't a naive person. She'd grown up in a household where her mother's second husband had understood that help always had a price, and she'd learned that lesson early and hard. She knew what it felt like when generosity carried a hook inside it. She studied the back of Ethan Brooks' head and looked for the hook. She couldn't find one, which she knew didn't mean it wasn't there. But Sophie was warm and the car wasn't the bus shelter, and sometimes you take the hand that's offered because the alternative is another 3 hours in sideways rain with $16 and nowhere to go. The room was on the 6th floor. 1 king bed, a rollaway cot already set up near the window, a bathroom with towels folded in precise thirds. Ethan and Noah took the room next door. He'd booked it before they even left the shelter. She'd noticed that, filed it away. He'd paid for 2 rooms without hesitation or theater, just quietly and completely. He knocked on the connecting door at 8 o'clock. "We're ordering room service. You're welcome to come in, or I can just have them bring yours separately. Whatever's easier." Emily had just gotten Sophie into the bathroom for a bath, and something about the word separate, about crawling back into isolation, even here, even now, made her say, "We'll come over." Dinner was not what she expected. She'd braced herself for charity dinner awkwardness, the performance of gratitude, the questions disguised as interest, the accounting of her failures that she'd have to present in exchange for a meal. She'd sat through versions of that with social workers and church volunteers and her own family, and she knew the shape of it. This wasn't that. Noah and Sophie immediately colonized the carpeted area between the beds with Noah's travel activity bag and Sophie's rabbit, Captain Flop, and began some kind of collaborative game that appeared to involve negotiating the terms of a rabbit and dinosaur alliance. Their conversation was entirely self-contained and deeply serious. Ethan ordered with the unselfconscious ease of someone who did this regularly, but he asked Emily what she wanted and waited for her to answer. He ordered the pancakes for Sophie without being asked. He didn't make her feel like a charity case because he didn't treat it like charity. He treated it like two people eating dinner in adjacent rooms who'd decided to combine the occasion. He asked about the nursing. She hadn't mentioned it in the shelter. She was certain she hadn't. Sophie mentioned it in the car, he said, when she looked surprised. She said her mom used to want to be a nurse and help sick people. Emily looked across the room at her daughter, who was currently explaining to Noah the correct way to hold a stuffed rabbit during negotiations. "That's a nice version of the story," Emily said. "What's the less nice version?" She turned her cup of tea in her hands. "I started a nursing program when Sophie was 2. Her dad was—" She paused, chose words. "He was gone. I was doing it alone, working nights, keeping up with the coursework. I was 1 semester from my clinical placement." "What happened?" "Sophie got sick. Genuinely sick. Pneumonia, 2 hospitalizations. I missed too many class days, failed 2 modules, lost my spot in the program." She set the cup down. "By the time she was better and I'd stabilized things financially enough to think about reapplying, it felt like something that had happened to someone else, someone who had time for dreams." Ethan listened without filling the silence with platitudes. "No, everything happens for a reason. No, you can still do it." He just let it sit there, which was the most respectful thing anyone had done with that story in a long time. "What kind of nursing?" he asked. "Pediatric maybe, or emergency?" A pause. "I was good at the coursework. I know that sounds like something people say. It doesn't sound like that. I just mean, it wasn't a fantasy. I was actually good at it." "I believe you," he said. And the thing that was strange, that caught her off guard, was that he said it like a person who meant it, not a person performing encouragement, like he was simply reporting a thing he believed to be true. She looked at him for a moment longer than she'd meant to. Later, much later, after the food and the bath and the impossible softness of a real bed, Emily lay awake listening to Sophie breathe in the roll-away cot across the room. Sophie slept the way she always did when she felt safe, one arm thrown over Captain Flop, mouth slightly open, completely surrendered to unconsciousness. She looked so small against the hotel pillow, so entirely trusting that the world would hold her while she was under. Emily thought about the list of phone calls she still needed to make, the forms she needed to fill out, the morning, which would come regardless, and the problem of what she did next that the morning would bring. But for right now, tonight, her daughter was warm and fed and sleeping without shivering. She stayed with that for a while. She didn't let herself think about Ethan Brooks, the strange, quiet man next door, with the careful eyes and the honest answers. She didn't let herself think about the way he'd talked to Sophie like she was a full person, or the way he'd said, "I believe you," like it was the simplest thing in the world. She didn't let herself think about any of that. She was a woman who had learned, the hard way, that gratitude and hope were expensive feelings. She couldn't afford them yet. But in the dark of the hotel room, with rain still hammering the window and her daughter breathing peacefully, she let herself feel one thing. Tonight, they were safe. Just tonight, just this one night, it was enough. Across the wall, in room 614, Ethan Brooks sat on the edge of his bed and watched his son sleep. Noah had gone out fast, the way 6-year-olds do. 1 minute rearranging the rabbit dinosaur peace treaty, the next minute horizontal and gone. He was a good sleeper. He had always been a good sleeper, even in those early terrible months when Ethan himself barely slept at all, as if Noah understood, on some cellular level, that one of them needed to be resting. Ethan looked at his son's face. He thought about a question Noah had asked in the car, quietly, while Sophie and Emily weren't listening, leaned over to Ethan's seat and whispered it with the careful seriousness of a child who knows the weight of a question before he asks it. "Daddy, is that lady like us? From before?" Ethan had taken a moment before he answered. "A little bit," he'd said. "Yeah." Noah had sat back, nodded once, the way he did when something confirmed a thing he'd already decided. Then he turned back to Sophie and resumed the peace treaty negotiation. From before. Ethan pressed his thumb against the edge of his wedding ring. A habit, not conscious anymore, just a thing his hand did in the dark. 3 years. It still felt like a door that hadn't fully shut. He'd gone to that street tonight because his GPS had taken him a wrong turn and his rideshare app had frozen in the rain. Pure mechanical failure. No significance to it, no meaning. And somehow, in the middle of that meaningless sequence of events, a little girl in a torn yellow poncho had looked up at him and asked if he could help. He didn't know why he'd said yes the way he did. He'd given to charities, he donated systematically, he supported organizations his late wife had cared about. This was different. This was direct and specific and had a face. This had two faces. He was practical enough to know that wasn't a plan. He'd helped for a night, and in the morning, Emily Carter would walk back out into the same impossible situation, $16 and a duffel bag, and a daughter who trusted her completely. He sat for a long time looking at his sleeping son. Then he picked up his phone and started making a different kind of call. The rain stopped at 3:47 in the morning. Emily knew because she was awake when it happened. One moment the window was full of the sound of water, and then it wasn't. The quiet it left behind was enormous. She lay in the dark and listened to it. In a few hours, Sophie would wake up and ask for the chocolate chip pancakes Ethan had promised. In a few hours, Emily would have to figure out the next thing, and the thing after that, and she still didn't know what those things were. But right now, in the enormous quiet after the rain, she let herself breathe. Just breathe. In, out. Okay, she told herself. Okay. She didn't know yet that the man in the next room was already on the phone at 4 in the morning, talking to someone about housing and scholarships and nursing programs in Millbrook County. She didn't know that the night wasn't an ending. She didn't know any of it yet. But the rain had stopped. And sometimes that's the only thing you need to know to keep going. Emily woke up before Sophie. That was normal. She'd been waking before Sophie for 5 years. Some biological alarm that couldn't be switched off. Some part of her brain that stayed half-lit even in sleep, monitoring. She opened her eyes into the pale gray light coming through the hotel curtains and lay still for a moment, doing the thing she always did in those first seconds, remembering where she was. The ceiling was clean, white. No water stain in the corner shaped like a boot, which was the thing she'd been looking at every morning for the past 8 months in the Pratt Street apartment. The sheets were heavy and smooth. Somewhere outside, the city was waking up in the absence of last night's rain, and the quiet had a different texture than the shelter-adjacent panic of the night before. She was in the Alderton Hotel on Callaway Street, room 615. A man named Ethan Brooks had paid for it. The reality of that settled back over her with the same complicated weight it had carried when she'd finally fallen asleep. She sat up slowly and looked at Sophie. Still out, Captain Flop locked in a one-arm chokehold, mouth open, one sock inexplicably missing. Emily had no idea where the sock had gone. It was the kind of mystery that only existed when you had a 5-year-old, and under other circumstances it would have made her smile. She reached for her phone on the nightstand. 6:53 in the morning, 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize, both after midnight, one voicemail. She stared at it for a second, then pressed play, keeping the volume low. Ms. Carter, this is Patricia Wells from Millbrook Housing Partnership. I know it's late. Early? I apologize for the hour. I was asked to reach out regarding a referral submitted on your behalf this evening. I'd like to speak with you as soon as you're available. My direct number is... Emily pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at it. A referral. Submitted on her behalf. At midnight. She sat with that for a long moment. The voicemail was still playing. The woman's number. Patient and precise. But Emily's brain had snagged on one phrase and wasn't moving past it. Submitted on your behalf. She knew who had done it. There was exactly one person who could have done it, who had been awake at midnight with both the means and the apparent motivation. She felt something move through her chest. Not gratitude, not yet. Something more complicated. Something that lived right on the border between relief and resistance, between thank you and what does this cost. She'd been in enough situations where kindness had a price tag hidden behind it, to know that the price didn't always show itself immediately. She got up, went to the bathroom, ran the water hot, and stood under it for a few minutes, which was a luxury she hadn't had since the hot water heater in the Pratt Street building started cutting out in October. She stood there until the guilt of running up Ethan's hotel bill made her turn it off. Then she put on the cleanest clothes she had from the duffel, pulled her hair back, and sat on the edge of the tub to call Patricia Wells back. The call lasted 11 minutes. By the end of it, Emily's hand was shaking slightly. Not from fear, for once, but from the unfamiliar, almost painful sensation of something that might be a door opening. Patricia Wells explained in the efficient tone of a woman who'd made hundreds of these calls that a transitional housing unit in the Sycamore Park complex had become available. 2 bedrooms, income-adjusted rent. A 12-month stability program that included childcare assistance and job placement resources. Normally, there was a waiting period of 4 to 6 weeks. In this case, Patricia Wells said, the referral came with a bridge payment covering your first and second month's rent while the income adjustment is processed. The unit is available on the 15th, which is 9 days from now. Emily's throat tightened. Who submitted the referral? A brief pause. I'm not at liberty to share that information, Ms. Carter. What I can tell you is that the documentation is in order and the offer is genuine. Would you like to come in today to complete the paperwork? She said yes. She wrote down the address on the hotel notepad with the Alderton letterhead. She thanked Patricia Wells and ended the call and sat on the edge of the bathtub in the quiet hotel bathroom for a full 2 minutes before she trusted herself to stand up. Then she heard Sophie's voice from the other room. Mommy, can I have the pancakes now? And she stood up. She knocked on the connecting door at 7:30. Ethan answered in under 10 seconds, which told her he'd been awake. He was already dressed. Dark jeans, a plain gray sweater, the kind of simple clothes that cost significantly more than they looked. He had a cup of coffee in one hand and dark circles under his eyes that he wasn't trying to hide. Good. She didn't trust people who looked rested at 7:30 in the morning. Sophie wants pancakes, Emily said. Is the offer still standing? Yeah, of course. He stepped back to let her in. Noah was on the floor with an iPad, headphones half on, fully absorbed in something animated. He looked up when Sophie appeared behind Emily, pointed at her, said, "Hey," and went back to his screen. Sophie went and sat down next to him on the carpet, with the ease of someone who'd known him for years rather than 12 hours. Emily stood in the middle of the room and didn't sit down. Ethan looked at her over his coffee cup. He was doing that thing again, waiting, not pushing, just holding space. She wasn't sure if it was a technique or just who he was. You called the housing partnership last night, she said. He didn't deny it, didn't apologize for it either. He just said, yes. At midnight? The director is an old contact. I knew he'd see the message. I didn't ask you to do that. No, he agreed. I need you to understand that I'm not some project. The words came out with more edge than she'd planned, but she didn't pull them back. I have a system. I know what I need to do. I've been managing this longer than last night. Ethan set his coffee cup down on the desk. He didn't look defensive, which, paradoxically, made it harder to stay sharp. I understand that, he said. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, a complete stranger made a decision about my life at midnight without asking me, and I'm supposed to be grateful for it. A beat. He looked at her steadily. You don't have to be grateful. That's not... She stopped, pressed her fingers against her forehead briefly. I'm not saying I don't appreciate it. I'm saying I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what you want. I don't want anything. Everyone wants something. He was quiet for a second. Not the quiet of someone caught. The quiet of someone choosing his words carefully because he'd thought about this. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. Cancer. Noah was 3. She was the person in our family who knew how to help people. Not write a check and move on. Actually help. She'd have been upset with me if she knew I'd left you in that shelter without doing anything useful. Emily looked at him. The sentence sat between them, plain and without decoration. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. The thing is, Ethan said, she used to say that real help isn't about the helper feeling good. It's about the person being helped having actual options. So I tried to make you an option, not a decision, just an option. You can walk away from the housing referral if you want. That's yours to choose. Emily stood with that for a moment. She thought about Patricia Wells's voice on the phone. 2 bedrooms, 9 days. A door she hadn't been able to find on her own. She thought about Sophie on the floor next to Noah, the two of them now apparently watching the same iPad screen and arguing cheerfully about which cartoon character would win in a fight. She thought about $16 and the binder clip on her bag and the crack in the pavement she'd stared at all last night to keep from crying. Okay, she said. It came out quieter than she intended. Okay, I have an appointment at 10 to do the paperwork. Something shifted in his expression. Not satisfaction, more like relief. Do you need someone to watch Sophie while you go? He asked. She started to say no automatically and then caught herself. Sophie couldn't come to the housing office. Sophie had been to enough housing offices that she'd learned to hate the smell of government building carpet. She looked at her daughter on the floor. I don't want to leave her with someone I don't know. That's fair. He paused. We could both go. Noah and Sophie can sit in the lobby. I'll stay in the lobby with them while you're in the meeting. Emily opened her mouth, closed it. The offer was so specifically practical that she couldn't find the angle in it, and not finding the angle in it made her more unsettled than anything else had. You have things to do, she said. Nothing that can't wait until after 10. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. He wasn't performing patience. He just had it, or something close enough to it, that the difference didn't matter this morning. Fine, she said. Thank you. He nodded. Picked up his coffee. I'll order the pancakes. The Millbrook Housing Partnership office was on the 4th floor of a building on Green Street, sandwiched between a dental office and a nonprofit that did tax preparation for low-income families. The waiting area had the universal characteristics of all such waiting areas: carpet the color of dried mustard, chairs upholstered in something that had given up being comfortable sometime in the previous decade, a stack of pamphlets about resources Emily had already tried. She'd been to rooms like this more times than she could count in the past 8 months. She'd developed a particular skill for sitting in them, spine straight, face neutral, ready to present herself as someone manageable, someone worth the paperwork. Patricia Wells was a woman in her late 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a desk covered in organized stacks that suggested a system only she fully understood. She shook Emily's hand with the brisk efficiency of someone who genuinely cared about outcomes but couldn't afford to care about everything else. The unit is a 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor of Building C, she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Elevator access, on-site laundry, a shared outdoor space. The school district is good. There's an elementary school 4 blocks away, which I imagine matters. It matters, Emily said. The childcare stipend runs for 12 months and covers 32 hours a week at any licensed provider in the county. Patricia was going through the folder with practiced efficiency. The job placement program is optional, but I'd encourage you to look at it. And there's this. She slid a separate sheet across. This came with the referral. I don't usually see this. Emily looked at the paper. It was a letter from the Millbrook County Educational Foundation. A scholarship, partial tuition for a registered nursing program, renewable annually for up to 3 years, conditional on maintaining satisfactory academic standing. Emily read it twice. Then she looked up. This was in the referral, she said. Came with it? Yes. I've been doing this work for 14 years, Ms. Carter, and I've never seen a referral package this complete. Patricia said it without judgment, just observation. Someone put real time into this. Emily looked back down at the paper. The foundation letterhead was clean and official. The scholarship amount was enough to cover tuition and course materials with a small margin left over. She thought about those nursing textbooks she'd sold, the ones she'd held on to for 3 years after dropping out of the program because she couldn't bring herself to give up on the version of herself that still believed she'd go back. She'd sold them for $11 on a second-hand app 2 months ago because Sophie needed new shoes. She folded the scholarship letter carefully and put it back in the folder. What do I need to sign? She said. Downstairs in the lobby, she found the 3 of them exactly where she'd left them. Noah and Sophie had constructed what appeared to be a fort out of their coats and the corner of a waiting area bench. Ethan was sitting across from it in a hard plastic chair, one leg crossed over the other, reading something on his phone. When Emily came through the glass door, he looked up. She held up the folder. Something crossed his face, brief, genuine, more relieved than pleased. Good, he said. There was a scholarship letter in the package, she said. She kept her voice even. For a nursing program. He met her gaze and didn't look away. Okay, Ethan. She stopped in front of him. She was aware of the kids in their coat fort, of the other people in the lobby, of the inadequacy of every sentence she was forming. This is too much. I don't have the words for how much this is. You don't need words for it. I need to be able to pay you back at some point. No, you don't. I'm serious. I know you are. He stood up, unhurried. Listen, you don't owe me anything. I mean that as plainly as I can say it. What I did, it's not a loan. It's not leverage. If you go do the nursing program and you hate it and you decide to become a marine biologist instead, that's fine. If you never want to see me again after today, that's fine too. She looked at him. The lobby hummed around them. A woman at the desk across the room answered a phone. A heating vent clicked somewhere overhead. I'm not good at accepting help, Emily said. I noticed. It's not about you specifically. She stopped. I've learned not to trust things I didn't earn. That makes complete sense, he said. And said it like he meant it. Not like he was being patient with her difficulty. Like he genuinely understood the logic of it. Sophie appeared from the coat fort, holding Captain Flop by one ear. Mommy, are we done? Noah says there's a really good grilled cheese place near here. Emily looked at her daughter. Then she looked at Ethan. Is there actually a good grilled cheese place near here? She said. Decent one, he said. Inconsistent service, but the bread is excellent. Okay, Emily said. We can do lunch. She said it the way she said most things those days. Practical, no particular warmth to it, a decision made on the available evidence. She didn't say it like a woman starting something. She was absolutely not thinking about it like that. But she picked up her folder and she followed him out the door. Trump. The grilled cheese place was called Nolan's, and it was, as advertised, inconsistent. The woman who took their order forgot Noah's drink and brought the wrong side for Emily, and then apologized so elaborately that Sophie tried to comfort her. But the bread was exactly as good as promised, thick sourdough with a dark buttered crust. And the four of them sat in a red vinyl booth by the window while the late morning sun made the wet street outside look almost clean. It was the first real meal Emily had sat down to eat at a table, with no rushing and no budget counting, in longer than she wanted to calculate. Sophie and Noah were operating at full social velocity by now, the tentative curiosity of the night before fully dissolved. They had, apparently, established a shared fictional universe involving Captain Flop and Noah's toy dinosaur, a stegosaurus named Gerald, and were now deep in world-building discussions about where Gerald and Captain Flop lived and whether their house had a pool. Rabbits can't swim, Sophie said authoritatively. Gerald can teach him. Stegosauruses are extinct. They can't teach anything. Gerald is not extinct. Gerald is right here. Sophie looked at Gerald the Stegosaurus, looked at Noah. I think your dinosaur needs a career counselor. Noah stared at her, then burst out laughing in that helpless, falling-over way kids do when something lands exactly right. Emily watched them from across the table. Something in her chest did a complicated thing she didn't try to name. She looked at Ethan. He was watching the kids too, the trace of a real smile on his face. The first fully unguarded expression she'd seen from him. It changed the way he looked, made him seem younger, or maybe just more present. She's something, he said. She has always been approximately 40 years old, Emily said. Since birth. Noah is 6 going on 4. He's moving in the wrong direction. Emily smiled. Actually, smiled, briefly and without intending to. She caught it happening and let it go rather than pulling it back, which was a small thing and probably didn't mean anything. Ethan looked at her. Can I ask you something? Depends on what it is. What was the thing that made you drop the nursing program? Was it just the missed days, or was there something else? She hadn't expected that question. Most people, when they found out she'd dropped out of nursing school, either expressed generic encouragement or moved on. Nobody asked what the thing was underneath it. She tore a corner off her bread and thought about it honestly. I was scared, she said. I don't usually say that. I usually say it was the logistics, the missed days, the failed modules, the money, and those were real. But underneath all of it, there was a part of me that thought maybe I wasn't capable of it. Not because I couldn't do the work, because every time something broke down in my life, the program was the first thing that went. And after a while, I started thinking maybe that meant I didn't deserve to have it. She said it simply, looking at her plate, not performing vulnerability, just saying the actual thing, because she was tired of the version that left that part out. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's a long way from true, he said. I know that intellectually. The version where you don't deserve it only makes sense if you assume all the things that broke down were your fault. Some of them were, maybe. Some things always are. He turned his coffee cup. But a sick kid isn't a failure, being broke isn't a character flaw, and dropping one thing to hold everything else together isn't evidence that you weren't supposed to have it. Emily looked at him. She'd heard versions of this speech before, from counselors, from well-meaning people, from her own brain on good days. She knew the argument, but something about hearing it from him, quietly, without preamble, like he was just stating facts, got through the familiar defenses and landed somewhere it hadn't before. She looked down at her bread. "You're very sure about that for someone who barely knows me," she said. "I was sure enough about it to put it in the referral," he said. The scholarship committee agreed. There was no smugness in it. He wasn't proud of himself. He was just honest, which was either a quality she could trust or the most sophisticated version of the thing she'd been watching for, the hidden hook, and she genuinely couldn't tell which. She decided not to decide yet. They walked back to the hotel so Emily and Sophie could get their things. The housing office appointment to actually view the Sycamore Park unit was scheduled for the following morning, which meant one more night at the Alderton. Ethan had said nothing about this, hadn't offered to extend it, hadn't asked her plans. Just left it open. She'd extended it herself, which cost her more dignity than she expected, but the math was unmistakable. One more night in a safe place for Sophie was worth the cost of asking. The walk from Nolan's was 4 blocks. Sophie and Noah walked ahead, still deep in the Gerald and Captain Flop canon, negotiating something that sounded like a diplomatic incident involving stolen carrots. Emily walked beside Ethan at an adult's pace, half a step behind the kids, and the conversation had gone quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. The city around them looked different in daylight than it had in the rain. Just an ordinary November morning, cold, clear-skied, people moving on sidewalks with coffee cups and purposes. The kind of day that asked nothing of you. Emily breathed it in. "How long were you married?" she asked. She wasn't sure why she asked it. It came out of the quiet naturally, the way questions do when you've stopped performing the version of yourself that only says calculated things. Ethan didn't seem surprised by it. 6 years. We met in our mid-20s, got married at 28. A beat. She was better at everything than I was, better with people, better at slowing down. I was always moving too fast, and she had this way of just... He paused, looked for the word. Of just not moving until I caught up. What was her name? Rachel. Was it sudden, the cancer? She was diagnosed about 14 months before she died, so no, not sudden, but... He stopped on the sidewalk briefly, just for a second, then kept walking. You'd think having the time to prepare would make it easier. It doesn't. It's just a longer version of not being ready. Emily didn't fill the silence with anything, the way he hadn't filled hers that morning. She let it be. After a moment, Ethan said, "Noah asks about her less now than he did a year ago. I don't know if that's healing or forgetting. That distinction matters to me more than it probably should." "It matters," Emily said. "That distinction is everything." He looked at her sideways. "Sophie doesn't know her dad," Emily said. "He left when she was 18 months old. She's never asked about him the way I expected her to. Sometimes I wonder if that means she's fine or if she's just saving it." "Probably both," Ethan said. "Probably," Emily agreed. Ahead of them, Sophie had stopped on the sidewalk and was crouching to look at something on the ground. A puddle, probably, or a bug. Noah crouched next to her with the instant solidarity of someone who finds all the same things interesting. 2 small people examining some minor wonder of the pavement while the city moved around them. Emily watched them and thought, not for the first time, that the saddest thing about the past year hadn't been the poverty, or the fear, or the exhausted nights when she didn't know what was coming. The saddest thing had been the shrinking, the way the world had gotten smaller and smaller until it was just the 2 of them, her and Sophie, Sophie and her, pressed together against everything else. No room for anything wider than survival. She hadn't let herself feel how small it had gotten until right now, standing on a sidewalk watching her daughter make a friend. "Thank you," she said. She said it quietly, not looking at him. "Not for the housing thing or the scholarship, though. Thank you for those too. But right now, I mean this. Last night, the room, dinner, today." She paused. Thank you for treating us like people. She felt him look at her. That's a low bar, he said. You'd be surprised, she said, how often people don't clear it. He didn't say anything to that, but when Sophie called out, "Mommy, come look, there's a whole trail of ants," he fell into step beside her without discussion, and they walked toward their kids together, and neither of them made anything of it. That evening, after Sophie had eaten room service pasta and fallen asleep holding Captain Flop, Emily sat by the window with her folder from the housing office. She went through every page slowly, reading everything twice, looking for the fine print she'd been trained her whole life to find. The clause that turned the kindness into something contractual. The mechanism by which she'd owe something she hadn't agreed to. She didn't find one. She sat with that for a long time. She looked at the scholarship letter again. The nursing program it referenced was affiliated with Millbrook General Hospital, 3-year full program, clinical placement in year 2. She'd looked it up on her phone already, read the curriculum, the placement statistics, the licensing exam pass rates. She'd been reading it with the specific analytical attention of someone who had been good at this once, and was quietly discovering she hadn't forgotten how. She set the folder down and looked out the window. The city at night, post-rain, was almost beautiful in the arbitrary way of cities. Lit windows stacked against the dark, headlights moving in slow lines, the distant geometry of a life she'd been outside of for a year, looking at through glass. She picked up her phone and started an email to the nursing program admissions office. She got 3 sentences in, stopped, deleted 2 of them, started again. The third draft was worse than the first. She put the phone down. It wasn't the words. She knew how to write a professional email. It was the act of it. The act of reaching for something she wanted after a year of only reaching for what she needed. She picked the phone back up and typed, "My name is Emily Carter. I am writing to inquire about enrollment in the registered nursing program for the upcoming spring intake. I was enrolled in a nursing program 4 years ago and left due to family circumstances. I am ready to return." She read it back. It was plain and direct and true. She pressed send before she could talk herself out of it. Then she set the phone down on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and listened to her daughter breathe in the dark. Sophie made a small sound in her sleep, not distressed, just the unconscious noise of a child who was warm and full and safe, and Emily closed her eyes. She didn't feel okay exactly. She felt like someone who had walked out to the edge of something and jumped, and was now in the part of the fall before you know whether the landing is going to hold. But she'd jumped. That was something. That was maybe the first real thing she'd done in a very long time that belonged entirely to her. The Sycamore Park apartment smelled like fresh paint and someone else's cleaning products. Emily stood in the doorway of Unit 2C on a Thursday morning with Sophie on her hip. Sophie was too old to be carried but had requested it anyway, and Emily had obliged without discussion, and looked at the 2 empty rooms that were about to become her life. It wasn't pretty. The carpet was beige and slightly worn near the entrance, the kind of neutral that rental properties default to because it shows dirt less than anything lighter and costs less than anything better. The kitchen had older appliances, one cabinet door slightly off its hinge. The window in the second bedroom looked out onto the building's utility area, a view consisting primarily of a dumpster and a chain-link fence with a few determined weeds growing through it. But there were 2 bedrooms, and the walls were clean, and the heating unit in the corner clicked on when the leasing manager, a tired man named Garrett, pressed the thermostat button and warm air actually came out of it. Emily set Sophie down. Sophie walked into the center of the empty living room, turned in a slow circle, and looked up at her mother. "This one?" she said. "This one," Emily said. Sophie considered it with the gravity of someone making a significant real estate decision. Then she walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot below, pressed her hand flat against the glass and said, "I want the room with the dumpster." "That's not, you can't want the room with the dumpster." "I like the dumpster. There are birds on it." Emily looked at Garrett. Garrett, who had clearly heard stranger things in his years managing rental properties, maintained a professional expression. "She can have the back bedroom," Emily said. "There are some seagulls," Garrett confirmed. "They come most mornings." Sophie turned around with an expression of complete satisfaction. "My birds," she said. Emily signed the lease that morning. Her hand was steady when she did it. She'd expected it to shake. expected some physical manifestation of the enormity of the thing, but it didn't. It just looked like a signature on a form, like something that was already true, finally getting written down. She got the keys on the 15th, 9 days after the night at the bus shelter. 9 days from nothing to something. It didn't feel like enough time for that much distance. It also felt, in the particular arithmetic of difficult lives, like an entire era. She didn't tell Ethan the exact date she was moving in. She'd thought about it. She'd thought about it more than was probably warranted, standing in the Sycamore Park parking lot after the lease signing, turning her new key over in her hand. He'd done enough, more than enough. She wasn't going to turn into a person who called a near stranger every time something happened. He called her first, not because he'd been waiting for it, or at least that's what she told herself. He called on the 14th, the day before her move-in date, and said, "I heard from Patricia that you signed. Congratulations." News travels fast. She sends me quarterly outcome reports. I donate to the program. A pause. I know that sounds... I'm not tracking you. I know, Emily said. She sat down on the edge of the Alderton bed. She'd checked out 4 days ago, was staying with a woman named Bev from her old diner days who'd come through with a couch and no questions, and looked at Sophie's drawings spread across the coffee table. I know you're not. It's fine. I wanted to say it anyway. Another pause. Do you have help for the move? Not offering. I'm asking. I have a rolling suitcase and 2 boxes, Emily said. I think I can manage. Okay. He said it without pressure. Let me know if that changes. It changed, not because she asked. She didn't ask. It changed because when she arrived at Sycamore Park on the morning of the 15th, with her suitcase and her 2 boxes and Sophie's backpack, she found a small truck double-parked in the lot. 2 men she'd never seen before were carrying flat-packed furniture boxes from it toward Building C. She stood on the sidewalk and watched this for a moment. Then she called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring. There's furniture, she said. I know. Ethan. It's basic stuff, a bed frame, a dresser, a kitchen table. Kids need a bed frame. He paused. Sophie needs a bed frame. She can't sleep on a floor. She would have been fine on a... Emily. His voice was quiet but direct. It's furniture, not a yacht. Let her have a bed frame. She stood on the sidewalk with her rolling suitcase and looked at the 2 men carrying boxes and hated, genuinely and specifically hated, how much she needed this. Not him, the furniture, the fact of it. The fact that she was 30 years old with a nursing scholarship and a signed lease, and she still needed someone to buy her daughter a bed frame. I'm going to pay you back, she said. Not the scholarship, I know that's a different thing, but the furniture I'm going to pay back. Okay, he said. I'm serious. I know you are. Are you agreeing just to end the conversation? A beat. A little bit, yes. She almost smiled. Didn't. Fine. Thank you. Tell Sophie the dresser has a sticker on it. Noah picked it. He said she'd like it. Emily looked at the furniture boxes disappearing through the building's front door. What kind of sticker? A frog wearing a graduation cap. She did smile then, turned away from the building so neither the moving men nor her own reflection in the lobby glass could see it. Okay, she said. Thank her for him. Tell her yourself. He wants to see the seagulls sometime. She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. The November air was cold and clean and the sky had gone fully blue. The first properly blue sky in what felt like weeks. I'll text you when we're settled, she said. No rush, he said. She ended the call and picked up her suitcase handle and walked toward the door. Unit 2C was going to be fine. She was going to be fine. She told herself that until it started to feel true, which took most of the morning. Well, the weeks that followed were the hardest kind of hard. Not crisis hard, not sleeping in a bus shelter hard, but the grinding, daily, incrementally demanding hard of building something from almost nothing. The kind of difficulty that doesn't have the dramatic clarity of rock bottom. It just has Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and then a Thursday that looks exactly like Wednesday. Emily started the nursing program on the 3rd Monday of January. The first day she walked into the Millbrook General Hospital Education Center, attached to the hospital's north wing, all fluorescent-lit corridors and bulletin boards covered in clinical charts. She was the oldest person in her cohort by 4 years. She knew this because she'd counted, automatically and without meaning to, the way you count things when you've spent a year doing survival math. There were 12 students in the intake group. 6 of them looked barely 20. 2 were nursing assistants who'd been working toward the RN for years. One was a former teacher named Marcus who'd burned out and was starting over at 35, which made Emily feel measurably better about everything. One was a young woman named Diana who had perfect handwriting and appeared to already know most of the first week's content, which made Emily feel measurably worse. The program coordinator was a woman named Dr. Lena Park, compact and direct, who opened the first session by saying, "This program will fail you at least once before it succeeds you. That's not a warning, that's a curriculum feature. How you respond to failing is 50% of what we're trying to teach you." Emily wrote that down. She wrote almost everything down. She was the person in the cohort who took the most notes, asked the most specific questions, stayed after sessions to clarify things she'd already understood, because understanding and knowing were 2 different things, and she was not going to lose her spot in this program to the difference between them. It was also, underneath all of that, the first time in 4 years that she had sat in a room where the primary thing being asked of her was to learn, not to survive, not to manage, not to hold 7 things together with fraying hands, just to absorb and retain and grow. It was more exhausting than she'd expected, and it was, in a way she couldn't quite articulate to anyone, the closest thing to relief she'd felt in years. Sophie, meanwhile, was attending the Sycamore Park Child Care Center 3 days a week, and the elementary school 4 blocks away on the other 2. The transition had not been entirely smooth. Sophie had spent the first week of childcare watching the door with the particular vigilance of a child who was not entirely convinced that the people leaving her would definitely come back. Emily knew that look. She'd put it there, or the year had put it there, which amounted to the same thing. She signed Sophie up for a weekly art class at the center that a counselor suggested, something about creative expression and attachment security, and felt the specific guilt of a parent who knows what their kid needs and is simultaneously grateful and furious that they needed it. The art class helped. By week 3, Sophie was coming home with elaborate painted scenes involving seagulls, diplomatic rabbits, and stegosauruses in professional settings. One painting featured Gerald the Stegosaurus wearing a tie. "He's an accountant now," Sophie explained when Emily studied it. "Noah's going to be so proud," Emily said. Sophie looked at the painting critically. "He might actually be a lawyer. The tie is very formal." Ethan called on the last Thursday of January, 4 weeks into the program. "How's it going?" he asked. Just that. Not how's the program or how are you adjusting. Just the flat, open version that let her answer however she wanted. "It's hard," she said. She was sitting at the kitchen table after Sophie's bedtime, textbook open, the small lamp she'd found at a second-hand store on Garfield Avenue throwing warm light over the pages. "Not harder than I expected, just real hard. The right kind." The right kind? The kind where you're struggling because you're actually trying to do something, not just because things are falling apart around you. She paused. I'd forgotten what that felt like. "That's good," he said, and she could hear him mean it. "How's Noah?" she asked. She asked every time. She'd started doing it automatically, and at some point had stopped noticing that she was doing it, which would have concerned her if she'd been paying attention. "He's convinced Gerald is now a maritime lawyer," Ethan said. "I don't know what that is, but apparently Sophie drew a picture of him on a boat." Emily laughed. It came out of her without warning or management. Just a real, actual laugh, the kind that surprised her. She hadn't realized how rarely she'd done that until the sound of it struck her as unfamiliar. There was a brief beat of quiet on the line. Then Ethan said, "That's the first time I've heard you laugh." She stopped, looked at the wall across the table. "It might be the first time in a while," she said honestly. "It sounds like you," he said. Then, like he'd noticed he'd said something and wasn't sure what to do with it, he moved on. Sophie's painting is framed in Noah's room, by the way. He hung it himself with tape, and it's slightly crooked, but he won't let me fix it. "He has good taste," Emily said. "He also has a framed crayon drawing of a frog that he says is a portrait of himself, so his taste is varied." Diverse artistic sensibilities, Emily said. Is that what we're calling it? She smiled at the wall, turned the page of her textbook without looking at it. These calls had become a thing, not a scheduled thing. She'd been clear with herself that it wasn't that, but a recurring thing, 2 or 3 times a week, usually in the evenings after Sophie was asleep. They started as brief check-ins and consistently ran longer than either of them acknowledged. They talked about the program, about Noah's school, about a restaurant in downtown Millbrook that Ethan had gone to for a meeting and said was overrated, about the cold that was settling into February like it planned to stay. She hadn't told anyone about the calls. There was nothing to tell. They were phone calls. People made phone calls. But she knew, with the precise awareness of someone who had learned to read situations carefully, that something was developing in those calls that didn't have a clean category yet. And she was choosing, deliberately and with full consciousness, not to look at it too directly. Not yet. She was 30 years old with a nursing scholarship and a newly functional life and a daughter who was just starting to stop watching the door. She was not going to complicate that by feeling something she couldn't afford to feel. She was extremely disciplined about this. She was slightly less disciplined about it every week. So, the complication arrived in the form of a Friday afternoon in February. She had a pharmacology exam on Monday. She'd been studying since Wednesday. Not panic studying, methodical studying, the organized kind with color-coded notes and timed review sessions that her younger cohort mates found either impressive or alarming. She couldn't tell which. She was reasonably confident. She'd been through the material 3 times. Then she found the section on drug interaction tables. The tables were not new to her. She'd covered them in her first nursing program 4 years ago, and she remembered the general framework. What she didn't remember, because she'd abandoned the program before covering it fully, was the specific cross-reference methodology required for the hospital's electronic dispensing system, which was apparently now a core component of the exam. She stared at the table for 45 minutes. She read the chapter twice. The methodology was not unclear, she could see the logic of it, but there was a gap in her foundational knowledge from the missing semester 4 years ago that kept making her reach for something that wasn't there. She tried calling Marcus. Marcus didn't pick up. She texted Diana, who responded with a photograph of her own notes that were, on close examination, more detailed than the textbook, but organized in a way that assumed knowledge Emily didn't currently have. She set her phone down, looked at the table, looked at the chapter. Then she picked up the phone and called Ethan, which she told herself was not about Ethan at all, but about the fact that he was a successful business person and probably understood systems-based cross-referencing from an operational standpoint and might have a useful angle on the methodology. "I have a pharmacology problem," she said when he picked up. "I'm probably not the right person for pharmacology problems. I'm not asking you to solve it, She stopped. What was she doing? "I'm having a moment," she said. "Sorry. This was stupid." "What kind of moment?" "The kind where you've been studying for 3 days and you hit something you should know, but there's a gap, and you can't figure out if you're missing it because it's actually hard or because you just need to sleep." A pause. "Have you eaten dinner?" She looked at the table, then around the kitchen. "No." "When did you last eat?" She thought about it. "Lunch." "It's 7:45, Emily. I know what time it is." "Okay." His voice was steady, not lecturing. "What if you eat something, put the tables down for an hour, and then look at them again, fresh eyes?" "I don't have time for fresh eyes. I have a weekend and a Monday exam." "You also have a brain that runs on something other than pharmacology notes." She wanted to argue with this and couldn't because it was factually accurate. She got up, made herself toast because that was what she had, and ate it standing at the counter. Ethan stayed on the line without making anything of it, talking about a problem with a supplier that had eaten his afternoon, not asking for her input, just filling the space with something real and ordinary while she ate toast and let her nervous system come down from 3 days of intensive studying. By 8:30, she felt human enough to go back to the tables. By 9:15, she had the cross-reference methodology. It wasn't that she'd been missing something structural. She'd been so anxious about the gap that she'd been reading the table defensively, looking for the things she didn't know, which prevented her from seeing the things she did know. Once she stopped bracing for failure and just read it as a system, which it was, a clear and logical system, the methodology locked in. She texted Ethan, "I got it." He texted back, "I know you would." She set the phone down, picked up a yellow highlighter, and went back to her notes. It was a Saturday in early March when things shifted, and it didn't happen dramatically. It happened in the way that most real things happen, quietly, in the middle of something ordinary, in a way that only made sense in retrospect. Ethan had offered to help her move a secondhand bookshelf she'd found on a neighborhood buy-nothing app. Not because he was her moving service, she'd been clear about that both to him and to herself, but because the bookshelf was on the third floor of a building on Vine Street and the woman selling it was 73 and had specifically requested that whoever picked it up bring someone with a back that worked. Emily's back worked. Ethan's also worked. This was the only operational logic of the arrangement. He drove a different vehicle than the SUV she'd met him in. A regular car this time, dark blue, slightly older, a scratch along the passenger door that suggested a parking lot at some point. She noticed that and felt inexplicably better about everything. They loaded the bookshelf with moderate competence and only one genuine moment of difficulty on the stairwell landing, during which Emily said something she would not repeat in front of Sophie, and Ethan said, with remarkable calm, "If you twist left, I can get my elbow out," which solved the problem. They drove back to Sycamore Park mostly in silence. Emily directed him to the parking lot, and he helped carry the bookshelf up to the second floor. And then Sophie appeared in the doorway of Unit 2C in her after-school clothes with paint on her left elbow and stared at the bookshelf with the focused attention of someone planning. "I want to put my books on the bottom shelf," she said. "Hello, Sophie," Ethan said. "Hi, can I help carry it?" "No," Emily said. "I could carry one end." "You're 5. 5 3/4. That is still 5. Ethan's face remained professionally neutral throughout this exchange. He and Emily got the bookshelf through the door and positioned it against the living room wall, and Emily stood back and looked at it with the particular satisfaction of someone who has acquired furniture through her own resourcefulness rather than someone else's money. "Good," she said. "That's good?" "It's slightly uneven," Ethan said, tilting his head. "It's fine. I have a level in the car." "It's fine, Ethan. I'm just saying that the floor is uneven too, so it evens out." He looked at the floor, looked at the bookshelf, seemed to accept this logic, probably because it wasn't actually wrong. Sophie had immediately begun arranging her books on the bottom shelf with the careful deliberation of someone installing an archive. She put the Fish Girl book first, then Captain Flop adjacent to the books because he was a reader, then a row of picture books in an order that appeared to be aesthetic rather than alphabetical. Noah was sitting on the carpet nearby, not helping with the books, watching Sophie with the interested patience of someone who understood that this was important work, and his role was to be present for it. He'd come with Ethan. This had become its own ordinary thing. When Ethan came to Sycamore Park, Noah came too, and Noah and Sophie operated with the easy familiarity of children who had declared each other's presence normal and moved on. They fought occasionally about who got the first turn with whatever game was current, about whether stegosauruses could realistically practice maritime law, about the correct way to arrange crayon colors in a box, and made up with the brisk efficiency of people who didn't have time for sustained conflict. Emily watched them and thought, not for the first time, that children did something that adults had mostly forgotten how to do. They decided whether they liked someone and then they just acted on it, without the 10,000 layers of self-protection that turned a simple thing into an interrogation. She envied that. She looked at Ethan. He was standing near the bookshelf, watching the kids with his hands in his jacket pockets, and there was something in his face at that moment, open, unguarded, the version of him that appeared occasionally and always when he wasn't performing anything, that made her chest do the complicated thing she'd been carefully not naming for 6 weeks. She looked away. "Coffee?" she said. "I have the decent kind now. Small victory." He looked over at her. "Yeah," he said. "Coffee." She went to the kitchen. He followed. The kids stayed in the living room with the books and the question of maritime law, and the 4 of them existed in the apartment together with the easy, unforced comfort of people who had started occupying the same space so regularly that the space had started to assume they would. Emily made the coffee. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the same one that had been delivered with the bed frame, the one she was determined to eventually pay for, and looked out the window at the parking lot. "You look less tired than you did 3 weeks ago," he said. "I sleep now. It turns out sleep helps." Revolutionary concept. "I know. Someone should write it up." She poured the coffee, brought both mugs to the table, sat down across from him. I got my pharmacology grade back. And? 91. He looked at her. Yeah? Yeah. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Diana got a 93, but Diana is also not human. I think she might be a study algorithm in a cardigan, so I'm not taking that personally. 91 is excellent. 91 is exactly what I needed to feel like I actually belong in that program, she said. And then she stopped because she'd said the real thing underneath the grade, the thing she didn't usually say directly. Ethan looked at her without rushing to fill the space. I spent 4 years thinking I'd dropped out because I wasn't good enough, she said. And every time I'd think about going back, that voice in my head would just remind me of the modules I'd failed, the position I'd lost. She looked at the mug. A 91 on a pharmacology exam is not a personality transformation. I know that. But it's evidence, real evidence that the voice was working from bad data. It was always working from bad data, Ethan said. I know that now. She looked up. It's different to know it because you've lived it versus know it because someone told you. He held her gaze. Yeah, he said. It is. Something in the room had a quality to it then, a kind of heightened ordinary. If that was a thing that existed, the sense of a conversation that had arrived somewhere, it had been heading for a while without either of them directing it there. Emily looked at him and, for the first time, didn't immediately look away. He looked back, not with the careful, managed expression he usually wore, with the unguarded one. From the living room, Sophie's voice cut through. Mommy, Noah says maritime lawyers don't have offices on boats, and I think he's wrong. Noah is probably right, Emily called back. Can they have boats, though? They can have boats. Ha, said Sophie. That's not what Noah started. The moment in the kitchen dissolved into the ordinary noise of two children negotiating victory terms, and Emily looked down at her coffee, and Ethan looked out the window, and neither of them said the thing that had been almost said. But it stayed in the room. It stayed there through the rest of the coffee and the bookshelf leveling conversation they eventually did have, and the drive-by argument about whether the parking lot seagulls were the same ones Sophie had adopted as regulars. It stayed there when Ethan and Noah left at 6 o'clock, and Noah hugged Sophie with the unconscious ease of a child who had decided this person was family. And Sophie hugged back with both arms, and Emily and Ethan stood in the doorway of Unit 2C with approximately 14 inches of distance between them and said goodbye in the way two people say goodbye when they've said it enough times that the act itself has started to feel like a place they both know. 91, he said from the hallway. I'll tell you about the 93 the next time I get one, she said. He almost smiled. I'll hold you to that. He left. Emily closed the door. She stood with her back to it for a moment in the quiet apartment that was becoming incrementally and improbably a home. Sophie appeared from the living room. Did Ethan leave? He left. Is he coming back? Emily looked at her daughter. Sophie was asking it the way she asked practical things, not with hope in it, just information seeking. Yeah, Emily said. I think so. Sophie considered this. Good. Gerald needs a new painting. I'm going to make him a doctor. She wandered back to her room. Emily heard the soft thud of her sitting down on her bed, the bed with the frog sticker on the dresser, and the sound of a drawer opening and closing and the particular quiet of a child who has started a project. Emily stood in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, in the apartment that was hers, that she'd signed for and was paying for and was building and breathed. She was not falling in love with Ethan Brooks. She was being careful and responsible and disciplined. She repeated this to herself a few more times. It was convincing mostly, just mostly. The thing about almost said things is that they don't stay quiet. Emily had learned this in nursing school, actually, in a unit on patient communication that she'd found unexpectedly applicable to her own life. The concept was about what happened when people didn't name what they were experiencing, how the unnamed thing didn't disappear. It just moved around underneath everything else, showing up in posture and silences, and the particular way someone avoided a subject, until the body found a way to say the thing the mouth refused to. She thought about that unit a lot in March. The calls continued, the visits continued. Ethan came to Sycamore Park on a Saturday in mid-March with Noah and a box of supplies Sophie had apparently requested for a science project, something involving vinegar and baking soda that was going to demonstrate volcanic activity for her kindergarten class. Emily had not been informed of this project until the day before it was due, which was a parenting experience so universal that she'd shared it with Marcus at the nursing program, and he'd laughed for approximately 90 seconds. The volcano experiment occupied the kitchen table for 2 hours and covered a significant portion of the counter in white foam. Noah declared it the best thing he had ever witnessed. Sophie declared it a scientific success. Emily declared the kitchen a disaster zone and cleaned it up with the practiced efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by the aftermath of small children with ambitions. Ethan dried dishes. This was not a thing she'd asked him to do. He just picked up a dish towel from the counter and started, the way you do when you're in someone's kitchen and there are wet dishes, and it seems like the obvious contribution. Emily had noticed it and said nothing, and also noticed that she said nothing, which told her something she was still not fully prepared to acknowledge. There were moments, specific, accumulated moments, that she cataloged without meaning to. The Tuesday in late March when she'd had a terrible clinical observation session. A scenario involving a pediatric patient that had brought up things she wasn't ready for, and she'd called Ethan from the hospital parking lot before she'd even gotten in her car. Not because he was the obvious person to call, because he was the person she wanted to call, which was different and more significant, and she'd noticed the difference immediately and filed it in the part of her brain labeled, "Not yet." The way he'd just said when she called, "What happened?" And then listened to all of it, not fixing it, not reframing it, not telling her it would be okay, just listening until she'd said everything she needed to say, and then asking, "What do you need right now?" And she'd said she didn't know, and he'd said that was fine, and they'd stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes talking about almost nothing, just voices in the dark of the parking lot, until she felt like herself again. The afternoon she'd been studying at the kitchen table, and Sophie had called from her room, "Mommy, I need the other Ethan." And Emily had looked up from her textbook and said, "What do you mean, the other Ethan?" And Sophie had come to the door and said, with 5-year-old clarity, "The one who's here. Not the phone one. He explains things better when he's standing up." Emily had stared at her daughter for a long moment. "He explains things better when he's standing up," she repeated. "He uses his hands," Sophie said, as if this explained everything, and went back to her room. Emily had looked at the kitchen table, looked at her textbook, looked at the wall. "Not yet," she said to the kitchen, out loud, to nobody. The kitchen did not respond. 7. The not yet lasted until April, and then it ended, and it ended in the specific way that things end when you've been holding them off with discipline and willpower and a genuinely impressive amount of self-deception, quickly, and in a moment you didn't see coming. It was a Sunday. Ethan and Noah had come for what had become the loose, unscheduled Sunday afternoon thing. No particular plan, just the 4 of them in the apartment, kids doing whatever the kids were currently doing, adults in the kitchen or the living room or on the front steps if the weather permitted. It was the kind of arrangement that had no official name and didn't need one, which was precisely why Emily had allowed herself to settle into it. Things with no official name were easier not to examine. The weather that Sunday was genuinely good for the first time in months, the pale, cautious warmth of early April, the kind that felt like it was asking permission. Ethan had suggested the park 2 blocks from Sycamore Park. Emily had agreed. The 4 of them had walked there with the easy, unself-conscious rhythm they'd developed. Sophie and Noah running ahead in the way kids run when there's space and no reason not to. They sat on a bench near the playground while the kids took over the climbing structure. It was a Sunday afternoon, other families around, ordinary public park sounds, kids, birds, someone's dog, a distant basketball game. Emily had her second cup of coffee of the day. Ethan had his first, having somehow gotten through a morning meeting before this. They were talking about nothing significant. A news story Ethan had read about infrastructure funding. A professor at the program Emily thought was excellent, and one she thought was coasting. The fact that Noah had recently developed strong opinions about which cereal brands were acceptable, which Ethan found baffling. He ate the same cereal for 2 years, Ethan said. Suddenly, there's a preferred brand. Sophie went through a phase where she would only eat pasta if it was a specific shape, Emily said. Not a brand, just the shape. Penne was acceptable. Rigatoni was a personal offense. What changed? She met Rigatoni at a birthday party, and apparently it won her over in person. Ethan looked at her. That look, the one with the unguarded expression in it. And then he looked at the playground, and Emily looked at the playground too, and there was a moment of entirely comfortable silence that she was fully aware of enjoying more than she was supposed to. That was when Sophie fell. Not badly. Kids fell. She'd been on the climbing structure, reached for a handhold, missed, and came down hard on her left knee on the rubberized surface. The sound she made wasn't screaming. It was the one beat of stunned silence that always preceded the real cry, that terrible held breath, and then full volume. Emily was off the bench before the cry started. Pure reflexive motion, the body moving before the brain issued the instruction, crossing the distance to the climbing structure in seconds. She was already crouched in front of Sophie, hands on her daughter's face, doing the automatic visual assessment she'd been learning in clinical training. No blood, no obvious deformity, just impact and shock and the very real pain of a child who'd hit hard ground unexpectedly.
Hey, I'm here. Sophie, look at me. Where does it hurt? My knee, Sophie sobbed. It really hurts, Mommy.
I know. I've got you. Let me look. Emily moved her hands to Sophie's knee. Red, no break in the skin, already swelling slightly in the way that soft tissue swells when you've given it a solid impact. She pressed gently, watching Sophie's face. Sophie hissed, but didn't pull back sharply. No acute localized pain that would suggest bone. Soft tissue. Painful and real and not a medical emergency. It's going to bruise, Emily said, keeping her voice even. But you didn't break anything. I can tell. Are you sure? Sophie was still crying, but the first wave of shock was passing. I'm sure. It's going to hurt for a bit, and then it's going to get better. I've got you. Ethan had come over and was crouched slightly behind and to the left, close enough to be present, far enough to give Emily the space to do what she was clearly already doing. Noah stood next to him, looking at Sophie with the serious expression of a child who understood that something had happened and was trying to figure out how worried to be. Is she okay? Noah asked. She's okay, Ethan said. She's got her mom. Sophie had put both arms around Emily's neck and was crying into her shoulder with the specific quality of crying that means the pain is real. But the bigger thing is the shock and the scared. Emily held her and rubbed her back and talked to her in the low, steady voice she'd been developing in clinical training. The one that said, I have this. You're safe. I know what I'm doing. After a few minutes, the crying went down to hiccuping, then to breathing. Then Sophie pulled back and looked at her knee. It's puffy, she said. It is, Emily confirmed. Is that bad? It means your body is paying attention. It'll go down. Sophie sniffled, looked at Emily. Something in her face was very young right then, very stripped down to the thing underneath all her 5-year-old opinions and diplomatic rabbit negotiations. You always know what to do, Sophie said. When I get hurt, Emily felt that in her sternum. It's my job, she said. I'm your mom. You knew because you're learning to be a nurse, Sophie said. It wasn't a question, just an observation, said with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who has been watching something and arrived at a conclusion. A little bit of both, Emily said. Sophie considered this, then. I want to be a nurse too, so I can tell when knees are okay. You've got time to decide, Emily said. I've already decided, said with complete finality. Emily looked at her daughter's face, the tear tracks drying, the knee red and puffy, the absolute unshakable certainty in her expression, and felt something so large and specific move through her that she had to look away before it showed on her face. She looked at Ethan. He was watching her. Not Sophie. Her. With an expression she didn't have a name for, something that lived at the intersection of admiration and something older and more complicated. He looked at her the way people look at something they've been trying not to look at directly, and then just did it anyway because the moment made looking away feel wrong. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. 3. Then Sophie said, Can we get ice cream? My knee needs ice cream. And the moment dissolved into the ordinary logistics of 4 people navigating a Sunday afternoon. And Emily stood up and took Sophie's hand, and they walked toward the park exit together. And Emily did not look at Ethan again for the remainder of the walk home, but she thought about that look for the rest of the day, and the day after. The thing Emily had not fully anticipated about developing feelings for someone. Not gratitude, not friendship, But the actual thing, the one she kept filing under not yet, was how much of it would feel like anxiety. She'd expected warmth. She'd expected the good version of wanting something. What she got instead was a persistent low-level hum of alarm, the kind her nervous system produced when it identified something it wasn't sure it could afford to lose. She talked to Donna about it on a Tuesday night in late April. Donna, who had broken up with the new boyfriend in February and was back to being reliably available, drove over with wine and leftover Thai food and sat on Emily's couch with the settled authority of someone who considered herself Emily's primary personal advisor, which she was. "Tell me the actual situation," Donna said. "Not the version where you pretend it's complicated." "It is complicated. Name one thing that's actually complicated." Emily looked at the ceiling. "He paid for my housing, my scholarship. He essentially... The life I have right now exists in a form that's livable because of what he did." "Okay. So how do I know if what I feel is real? Or if it's just the fact that he changed everything when I had nothing? That's not a solid foundation for something real." Donna ate a spring roll. "You've had nothing before," she said. "Different nothings. People helped you out of those. Your mom, Dennis at the diner sometimes, me, the couch situation. Did you fall in love with any of us?" "That's not the same thing." "Why not?" "Because..." Emily stopped. "Because it's him specifically," Donna said. Not as a question. Emily picked up her wine glass, put it down without drinking from it. He knew about Rachel before he did any of it, his wife. He did it because of her, because of who she was, because he was trying to be what she would have wanted him to be. That's not personal. That's a tribute to someone else. "Did he tell you that's why?" "He said someone did it for him once, and she always helped people." "That's not the same as saying it wasn't about you. He didn't know me. He knew you enough." Donna looked at her with the direct, affectionate impatience of a friend who has been watching you sidestep the obvious for months. "Emily, you are doing the thing where you build a case against yourself so that you don't have to be afraid of being wrong." Emily looked at the wall. "What if I tell him and it changes things?" she said. Came out quieter than she intended. "What if it makes everything weird and the kids lose each other and I lose whatever this is, what we have now?" "You mean the extremely functional arrangement where two people who are clearly in love with each other pretend to just be friends while their children create an elaborate legal practice for a toy dinosaur?" Emily looked at Donna. Donna looked back. "He's not in love with me," Emily said. "Oh my God," Donna said. "Emily, he shows up every weekend. He dried your dishes. He submitted a housing referral at midnight for a woman he'd known for 4 hours. He knows your pharmacology exam schedule." Donna leaned forward. "When's the last time he talked about dating someone?" Emily didn't answer. "Because I've been listening to you talk about him for 3 months," Donna said, "and you've never once mentioned him talking about anyone else. Has he?" He hadn't. Emily knew he hadn't. She'd noticed that absence the way you notice the absence of background noise. Not consciously, but registering it. "He's careful," Emily said. "He could just be careful." "Or he's waiting," Donna said, "to make sure you're choosing him freely, not because you owe him anything." Emily went very still. She thought about what Ethan had said in the lobby of the housing office 3 months ago. "I wanted her to have options. I didn't want her to choose me out of obligation." He'd been talking about his wife. She'd assumed he was talking about his wife. "I have to go," Emily said. "You literally live here," Donna said. "I have to think." "That's exactly your problem. You've been thinking for 3 months. Donna picked up her spring roll. "At some point, you have to just say the thing." Tachika. She didn't say the thing immediately. That wasn't who she was. What she did was sit with it differently. She stopped filing it under "not yet" and started just letting it exist the way it actually was, which was she had fallen in love with Ethan Brooks somewhere between the grilled cheese restaurant and the pharmacology crisis and the dish towel. And it was real, not gratitude, not transference, not a complex psychological response to being rescued. It was the specific, inconvenient, person-shaped thing that happened when you spent enough time with someone whose company made you more yourself rather than less. She knew this the way she knew clinical facts now. Not because someone told her, but because she'd examined the evidence and arrived at the conclusion honestly. What she didn't know was what to do with it. She found out in early May, in the parking lot of Sycamore Park, on a Thursday evening when Ethan had stopped by briefly to drop off a book Noah had left there the previous Sunday. It was a 5-minute interaction. He'd knocked, she'd opened the door, Sophie had appeared from somewhere and immediately begun telling him about Gerald's latest career development. He was now apparently considering oncology based on a children's book about hospitals Sophie had checked out from the school library. And Ethan had listened to this with complete seriousness. Then he'd handed Emily the book and said he needed to get back. He had an early call tomorrow. She'd walked him to the door. He'd said goodnight to Sophie, who was already heading back to her room. And then it was just the two of them in the doorway, ordinary, the same way it always was. Except Emily had made a decision somewhere in the past 12 days, and decisions, she'd learned, changed the quality of the ordinary. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked at her. "Sure. That thing you said in the housing office, about wanting me to choose freely, not because of what you'd done." He was still, not guarded. She would have recognized guarded. This was something closer to bracing, like someone who has been waiting for a question and is now genuinely uncertain about the answer. "Yeah," he said carefully. "Were you talking about me specifically?" she said. "Or about the general principle?" A beat. He looked at her with the honest, unmanaged expression, the one she'd been cataloging for months. "What do you think?" he said, very quietly. "I think you were talking about me," she said. "And I think you've been waiting for something from me for a while. And I think I've been scared of what it would mean to say the thing. Because of everything you did. Because I didn't want to feel like I was giving you something you'd purchased without meaning to." "Emily, I'm not done," she said, and he closed his mouth. "I've been going over it for months, trying to figure out if what I feel is real or just complicated. And I decided to just look at it straight, without the case I'd been building against it." She looked at him. "It's real. What I feel is real. It's not because of the housing or the scholarship, it's because of you specifically. The dish towel, the parking lot phone calls, the way you talk to Sophie, the way you let me be angry at you for helping me." A pause. "I'm in love with you. I think I have been for a while, and I'm saying it because Donna said I've been thinking too long, and she's probably right." Ethan stood in the doorway of Unit 2C on a Thursday evening in May and looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than a moment. Then he said, "I have been waiting." "I know. I didn't want to push. I was afraid of exactly what you said, that you'd feel obligated, that it would look like—" "It doesn't," she said. "I know the difference now." He looked at her. "I've been in love with you since approximately the grilled cheese place," he said, "which I realize is very fast, and I'm aware of how it sounds." "The inconsistent service and excellent bread place," she said. "That's the one." Something in his face shifted. The last of the careful management fell away, and he looked like himself, completely, the version she'd been glimpsing in pieces for months. "You argued with me about the level," he said, "in front of the bookshelf, and I thought, there it is. That's the actual person." "I was right about the floor," she said. "You were absolutely right about the floor." They stood in the doorway. The hallway of Sycamore Park Building C was not a romantic setting. Fluorescent overhead light, the faint smell of someone's dinner 2 doors down, carpet that was slightly worse than the unit's carpet. The specificity of it was exactly right. He reached out and took her hand. Just that. His hand around hers, nothing declarative about it. Just the simple physical fact of contact after months of calculated distance. She looked at their hands, looked at him. "This is terrifying," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I know. I have a nursing exam in 2 weeks, and a daughter who has already decided your son is her brother, and the entire thing is very complicated," he said. "Completely unreasonable," she said. "Completely," he agreed. Neither of them moved. From inside the apartment, Sophie's voice. "Mommy, can Ethan stay for dinner? I want to tell him about oncology." Emily closed her eyes briefly, opened them. Ethan was trying not to smile and failing. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" she said. I would very much like to stay for dinner, he said. It's just pasta. What shape? She looked at him. Penne. Acceptable, he said. She stepped back from the door to let him in, and he came in, and Sophie appeared from the hallway and pulled him toward the living room by the hand to explain Gerald's medical school options. And the apartment had the sounds of an ordinary Thursday evening. 2 kids, 2 adults, a kitchen with the pasta water starting to boil. And Emily stood for a moment in the entryway with her hand still warm from where his had been. She thought about the bus shelter, the rain, the $16 and the binder clip and the question she couldn't answer. She thought about how far that night was from this one. Then she went to the kitchen because the pasta water was boiling and somebody had to make dinner. Some things were still exactly that simple. The pasta was penne. The dinner ran long, and Gerald the Stegosaurus was formally enrolled in a fictional medical school by the end of the evening. These were not the circumstances Emily would have chosen for the night she told Ethan she loved him. She'd imagined, in the private moments when she'd allowed herself to imagine anything, something with more dignity to it. Fewer interruptions. A setting that didn't involve a frog-stickered dresser and the lingering smell of someone else's Thai food from 2 doors down. What she got instead was Noah accidentally spilling his water glass at the table and Sophie saying, "That's okay, Gerald does that too," with the specific compassion of a child who has decided that accidents don't define you, and Ethan mopping up the spill with the dish towel, the same dish towel, or one very like it, while Noah apologized 4 times in a row, and Emily watching all of it from across the table and thinking, this is it, this is exactly it, not the dramatic version, just this. After dinner, after the kids were in their respective places, Noah on the living room couch with his iPad, Sophie in her room with a library book about the human body that she was reading as career research. Ethan and Emily sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea going cold between them, and they talked for 2 hours with the particular quality of conversation that happens when people have finally stopped editing themselves. They talked about Rachel, really talked about her, not the careful periphery version Ethan usually allowed. He told Emily about the diagnosis, about the 14 months, about the specific cruelty of a disease that gave you enough time to say everything and somehow still left things unsaid. He told her that the hardest part wasn't the grief, which had its own terrible shape, and he'd learned to carry it. The hardest part was the fear that Noah would grow up not knowing who his mother had been. Not her illness, but her. The way she laughed, the way she argued, the specific quality of her attention when she was listening to someone she cared about. "I've been trying to keep her present for him," Ethan said, telling him stories, showing him pictures, but I can't tell if I'm doing it because he needs it or because I need to. "Both can be true," Emily said. "Yeah." He turned the tea mug. "He asked me last month if I was going to find a new wife." Emily looked at him. "6-year-olds," Ethan said. No preamble. We were eating breakfast and he just asked. "What did you say?" I said I didn't know, that I hadn't been thinking about it. A beat. He said, "What about Sophie's mom?" Just like that, while eating cereal. Emily was quiet for a moment. "What did you say to that?" I said that was a complicated question. He looked at her across the table. He said, "It doesn't seem that complicated, Dad," and went back to eating. Emily looked at the table, felt the smile coming before she could stop it. He has your talent for understatement. He has Rachel's talent for going straight to the point, and my face while doing it. Ethan paused. "He likes you. He's liked you since the bus shelter." "Sophie likes you," Emily said. "She told me 3 weeks ago that you explain things better when you're standing up because you use your hands." That is very accurate feedback. I thought so too. They sat in the kitchen in the quiet of an evening that had already said the most important things and was now settling into what came after. Not the relief of resolution exactly, but something more honest than that. The acknowledgement that 2 people had decided to try something real, which was different from easy, and would continue to be different from easy for a long time. "I need you to know something," Emily said. She said it to her tea mug, then made herself say it to his face. "What you did for us, the housing, the scholarship, all of it, that's something I'm going to sit with for the rest of my life. The weight of it. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, I'm not the kind of person who can just receive something that large and not feel the shape of it. I know that about you," he said. "I need to build this life as mine," she said. "Not yours. Mine.
I need to be the person who pays her own rent and passes her own exams and earns her own position. Not because I don't trust you, but because I can't be with you if I'm not also completely myself. Does that make sense?" He looked at her steadily. "It makes complete sense."
"I'm going to be difficult sometimes," she said. "I don't ask for help easily. I get defensive when I feel like I'm not keeping up. I have a 5-year-old who has strong opinions about pasta shapes and is apparently planning a medical career, and she comes first. Always." "I know." "You say that now."
"Emily," his voice was quiet and direct. "I know. I'm not asking you to be uncomplicated. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you already are." He paused. "I have a 6-year-old who just enrolled a toy dinosaur in medical school and asks logistically challenging questions over breakfast. I'm also not a simple situation." She looked at him. "I know what I'm saying yes to," he said. "I've known for a while." She breathed. "Let it in." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. It wasn't a fairy tale moment. Nobody said anything poetic. The kitchen light had a slight flicker to it that Garrett, the leasing manager, had been promising to fix since February. The tea was cold. Sophie called from her room to ask if the pancreas was in the stomach or next to it, and Emily called back next to it without breaking eye contact with Ethan, and Ethan pressed his lips together to hold back the laugh. And that was the moment, actually. That was the one she'd remember. Not the doorway, not the hand. That one. In the flickering kitchen light, with cold tea and a child asking about the pancreas. Die. The weeks that followed were not a montage. They were actual weeks, with actual difficulty in them, because that's what happens when real things develop between real people who are also managing real lives. There were things that were harder than Emily expected. The first time Ethan met Donna, Donna pulled Emily into the kitchen under the pretense of getting more drinks and said, at low volume, "Okay, I need you to understand that you did not adequately describe him." And Emily said, "I described him accurately." And Donna said, "You said he was tall and had good instincts. You didn't say he was..." And Emily said Donna in a tone that ended the conversation. And they went back out with the drinks. And Donna spent the rest of the evening being perfectly normal and also texting Emily from across the room. There was the afternoon in June when Ethan's mother called while he was at Sycamore Park, and he took the call in the hallway, and Emily could hear, from the kitchen, the particular quality of a conversation with someone who had opinions about the direction of his life. She couldn't hear the words. She could hear the tone. Ethan's careful, managed patience, and underneath it something that sounded like old frustration. He came back in 15 minutes later looking like someone who had successfully contained something that wanted to be less contained. "Everything okay?" she said. "My mother would like to meet you," he said. "That sounds simple." "My mother is not simple. Neither is mine." He looked at her. Something passed between them. The specific recognition of two people who both have complicated mothers and have survived them, and find each other's eyes across that shared terrain. "She'll love Sophie," he said. "She's easier with kids than adults." "That's reassuring and also a little concerning," Emily said. "Welcome to my family," he said. "I'm sorry in advance." His mother, a woman named Carolyn Brooks, was in her early 60s, impeccably dressed, and had the particular quality of a person who had spent a lifetime in rooms where expectations were high, and the cost of falling short was social rather than material. She looked at Emily with the careful, measuring attention of someone doing an assessment and trying not to look like she was doing an assessment. She lasted approximately 8 minutes before Sophie walked up to her with a drawing and said, "This is Gerald. He's in medical school now. Do you want to see his stethoscope?" Carolyn Brooks looked at the drawing, looked at Sophie. Something in her face shifted, the assessment dropping away, replaced by something unguarded and genuine. "Is he a good doctor?" she asked, completely seriously. Sophie considered. "He's still learning, but he has good bedside manner." Carolyn looked at Emily with an expression that was not entirely what Emily had expected. Not approval, exactly. Something more honest than that. Recognition. "She's remarkable," Carolyn said. "She is," Emily said, simply, without performance. It wasn't a perfect lunch. Carolyn said something about the nursing program that had the faint condescension of someone who considered professional ambition in women admirable in principle and complicated in practice,
and Emily responded with the even, direct tone she'd been developing all year. Not aggressive, just clear. And Ethan watched this with the attention of someone who was genuinely uncertain which direction it was heading and was prepared to intervene, and also aware that Emily did not need him to intervene. She didn't. By the end of the lunch, Carolyn had asked Sophie 3 questions about Gerald's medical specialty, told Emily that the nursing shortage in Millbrook County was a genuine problem she cared about, and looked at Ethan when she thought neither Emily nor Sophie was watching, with an expression that Emily, in her peripheral vision, cataloged as something close to relief. She told Ethan about it later on the phone. "She looked relieved," Emily said. "She's been worried about me for 3 years," he said. "Not about whether I was okay and about whether I was going to be okay. There's a difference." Emily understood the difference. She'd been on both sides of it. "She liked Sophie," he said. "Everyone likes Sophie. Sophie is objectively likable. She liked you too. She won't say that directly, but she asked me afterward whether you were as competent as you seemed, and for my mother that's the equivalent of enthusiastic endorsement." Emily snorted. High bar. "She grew up in a family where complimenting people directly was considered excessive," he said. "We're all works in progress." "I know the feeling," Emily said. Summer arrived the way Millbrook summers did. Suddenly, and with full commitment, the temperature climbing in a week from coat weather to the specific aggressive warmth of a city that had no good relationship with shade. Sophie finished her first year of school with a report card that her teacher described as exceptional in both academic engagement and interpersonal mediation skills, which was educator language for your daughter, sorted out 2 arguments at recess this week and did it better than I could have. Noah finished 2nd grade and celebrated by declaring the summer officially Gerald's residency period, during which the Stegosaurus would do clinical rotations. Emily completed her first year of the nursing program in late May with a grade average that put her in the top 3 of her cohort. She knew this because Dr. Lena Park told her directly, which was not something Dr. Park did casually. "You have a particular quality in clinical scenarios," Dr. Park said at the end of year review. "An ability to stay present under pressure without losing the emotional register. That's harder to teach than the pharmacology." Emily thought about the bus shelter, about keeping her voice steady while Sophie asked if she was sad, about the parking lot at Millbrook General at 10:30 on a terrible Tuesday evening, calling someone because she needed a voice in the dark. "I've had practice," she said. The second year of the program brought clinical placements, which meant real patients and real wards, and the particular confrontation of textbook knowledge meeting human reality. Emily was placed in the pediatric unit at Millbrook General, her first choice, the thing she'd written in her application letter on that cold February night with shaking hands. The first week was the hardest week she'd had since the bus shelter, but for entirely different reasons. She was competent. She knew she was competent. The grades and Dr. Park and her own honest self-assessment all confirmed it. What the clinical placements required was something beyond competence. They required her to be present for people in the worst moments of their lives with the kind of steady, genuine care that didn't perform warmth, but actually had it. She had it. She discovered this not because someone told her, but because she felt it in the work. The particular aliveness of being in a room where you were genuinely needed and genuinely able to help. Not performing, not managing, actually doing the thing. She called Ethan from the hospital parking lot after her 3rd week of placement, not because she was falling apart, but because she wanted to tell someone, and he was the person she wanted to tell. "I think I understand now," she said, "why I kept holding on to it, even when I was selling the textbooks. I think some part of me knew that this was the thing I was supposed to be doing." "Yeah," he said, "I think that part was right." "I'm good at it," she said, not with arrogance, with the plain, honest recognition of someone who has found the place where their particular combination of qualities becomes useful. "I know you are," he said. "I've known since you assessed Sophie's knee in the park, and your voice didn't waver once." She stood in the parking lot of Millbrook General in her scrubs, sun on her face, and let herself feel the full weight of that sentence, what it meant, how far she'd traveled to arrive at a place where someone who knew her well could say a thing like that and she could believe it. "Thank you," she said. Not for the scholarship, not for the housing, not for the specific acts of the November night, for the ongoing thing, the thing that was harder to name and more important than any of it.
You did this, he said. I want you to be clear about that. We both know it's more complicated than that. The complicated version is also true, he said, but so is the simple one. You did this, Emily. She stood with that for a moment. Come over for dinner, she said. Sophie wants to update you on Gerald's residency. Apparently there's been a complication. Medical or legal? I think both. She wasn't clear on the details. I'll be there at 6, he said. Sa. Ethan asked her to marry him on a Sunday morning in October, which was not planned and not particularly scenic and was therefore exactly right. They'd been together, officially, in the acknowledged way, for 5 months. They had not rushed anything. Emily had insisted on that without making it a rule, just by being herself, which meant taking things at the pace at which she could be fully honest about them. Ethan had matched that pace without complaint, which was itself a form of answer to the question of who he was. The kids had adapted with the casual ease that children display when something confirms what they already knew. Sophie had announced approximately 2 weeks after the Thursday evening pasta dinner that she and Noah were basically siblings now, and that was that. Noah had accepted this designation without comment, which in his particular emotional vocabulary meant complete agreement. The 4 of them had fallen into rhythms that were not the rhythms of 2 separate families coordinating schedules, but the specific rhythms of people who shared a life in the loose, real, unidealized way that actual shared lives develop. Ethan stayed for dinner more often than not. Emily had a drawer in his apartment, not a symbolic drawer, a functional one, because she spent enough time there that having to pack a bag every time was inefficient, which was how she'd framed it to herself and to him, and which they both understood was true, and also not the whole story. Sophie had a room at Ethan's apartment. This had happened gradually, then completely. A sleeping bag that became a cot, that became a real bed with a headboard. Noah had supervised the installation of the headboard with the serious authority of someone ensuring that building standards were met. The Sunday morning in October, Emily was at Ethan's apartment. She'd spent Saturday there with the kids, who had declared a joint project of reorganizing Gerald's medical filing system, which required a significant quantity of construction paper and at least 2 hours of conference. Emily and Ethan had made dinner and watched a movie after the kids were in bed, and she'd stayed because it was late and also because she'd stopped pretending that was the only reason. She was in the kitchen making coffee when Ethan came in. He looked like someone who had been awake for a while. He had the expression of a person who had been thinking about something and had arrived at the end of the thinking and was now at the part where you say the thing. She looked at him. You okay? Yeah. He came to the counter and stood there. I've been trying to figure out how to do this properly. I've been thinking about it for a couple months. Emily set the coffee down, looked at him. I don't have a ring, he said. I was going to get one, but then I thought you'd probably have opinions about the ring. And I didn't want to spend money on something you were just going to tell me was excessive, so I thought I'd ask first. She stared at him. I want to marry Yuki-san, he said. Not as a next logical step, or because we've been together 5 months, and the kids have already merged their fictional legal practices. Because you're the person I want to be in a room with for the rest of my life. Because I want to watch you become the nurse you've been becoming. Because I want Sophie and Noah to grow up in the same house and fight about cereal brands and grow into people who know what it looks like when someone stays. He paused. And because when things go wrong, and they will, they always do, you're who I want to face it with. The kitchen was very quiet. The coffee maker finished its cycle and clicked off. From down the hall, the sound of 2 children waking up. Noah's voice, Sophie's answer, the particular morning negotiation noise of a shared space. Emily looked at Ethan. She thought about the bus shelter. She thought about $16 and a binder clip and a question she couldn't answer. She thought about the distance between that night and this morning, and how it was not a clean straight line but a real one, crooked and costly and worth every inch. I have opinions about the ring, she said. His face, the thing that happened on his face. Is that a yes? He said. That's a yes, she said. And I want something simple, not expensive simple, actually simple. Okay? I mean it. I know you mean it. I want to be there when you pick it, obviously. And I want Sophie to know before anyone else. She'll be devastated if she finds out from someone other than me. She's going to want to tell Gerald, Ethan said. Gerald is already in the family, Emily said. He can find out with everyone else.
He crossed the kitchen and put his hands on her face, and she put hers on his arms, and they stood in the Sunday morning kitchen in the ordinary, imperfect, genuinely real way of two people who had taken a long and complicated route to arrive at something uncomplicated. Sophie appeared in the doorway, looked at them, looked between them with the assessing eyes of a 6-year-old who has been paying attention. "Are you getting married?" she said. Emily pulled back slightly. "Were you listening?" "No. You just look like the people in books who are getting married." Sophie considered this. "Also, Noah said you'd probably ask soon because you've been weird about it for weeks, Dad." Ethan looked at his son, who had appeared behind Sophie in the doorway with the innocent expression of someone who had said exactly what he'd said and stood by it. "You told Sophie I was weird about it?" Ethan said. "You were checking your pockets a lot," Noah said, "like you were looking for something." "I was thinking," Ethan said. "Your thinking face and your looking for something face are the same," Noah said. Sophie turned back to Emily with the matter-of-fact certainty she'd been born with. "So are you?" Emily looked at her daughter, her remarkable, direct, 5-going-on-40 daughter who asked questions and expected real answers, and had, in the past year, watched her mother lose everything and build something better from the pieces, and had done it all with the steady trust of someone who never stopped believing the floor would hold. "Yeah, Bug," Emily said, "we are." Sophie absorbed this. Then, "Is Noah going to be my brother?" "If you want him to be," Emily said. Sophie turned and looked at Noah with the gravity of a major decision. Noah looked back with the serious patience of someone who understood what was being decided. "He already is," Sophie said. "I just wanted it to be official." Noah, who was 7 and therefore too old for certain expressions, allowed himself a smile that he didn't try to hide. They married in March of the following year, 14 months after a rainy Thursday evening at the Delwood Avenue bus shelter. It was not a large wedding. Emily had been clear about that, not because she didn't want to celebrate, but because she'd spent enough time with nothing to know the difference between the thing itself and the performance of the thing. What she wanted was the real version, the people who had actually been present in the real story. Donna stood up with her. Marcus from the nursing program came with his wife. Patricia Wells from the housing partnership came and shook Emily's hand with the brisk warmth of someone who'd been doing this work for 14 years and still found the good outcomes worthwhile. Dr. Lena Park sent a card that said, in her characteristic economy of language, "You earned this, both of it." Carolyn Brooks wore a dress that cost more than Emily's monthly rent and cried through the ceremony, which Emily chose to interpret as endorsement. Sophie and Noah sat in the front row. Sophie was wearing a blue dress she had selected herself after a 40-minute process that involved consultation with Donna, 3 trips to different sections of the store, and a final decision made on the grounds that the blue one looks like something a doctor would wear to a wedding. Noah wore a tie that he'd picked out himself and which was, objectively, slightly too formal for the occasion, but nobody told him that. During the ceremony, Noah reached over and held Sophie's hand. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way you reach for someone's hand when you're in a moment together and you want them to know you're in it with them. Sophie held on. Emily saw it from where she stood at the front of the room and had to look at Ethan very deliberately to keep her composure. And Ethan looked back at her with the expression she'd learned to read over 14 months, the unguarded one, the real one, and whatever she'd been trying to hold together, let go in the best possible way. They said what they meant to say to each other, in plain language, without metaphors. Emily had written her own and rewritten it twice, and the final version was direct and honest and not particularly poetic and entirely true. Ethan's was shorter than hers and said more than it looked like it said, which was exactly how he communicated. The part she remembered most clearly afterward was not the ceremony itself, but the moment just after, the administrative transitional moment when you've said the words and the room shifts into celebration and you're briefly standing in the space between one thing and the next. Ethan had looked at her and she'd looked at him, and Sophie had said, loudly enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "Noah, they did it." And Noah had said, with the magnificent understatement of his father, "Yeah, finally." The nursing program graduation was in May, 2 months after the wedding. Emily had tried to keep it low-key. She told Ethan the date and time and said it was not a big deal. It was just a ceremony. She wasn't the kind of person who needed a production made of things. She arrived at the auditorium to find Donna and Carolyn Brooks seated together in the 4th row, apparently having developed an understanding over the past 2 months
that Emily had not been fully briefed on. Patricia Wells was there. Marcus sat with his wife 3 rows back, and in the very front row, center seats, Ethan sat with Sophie on one side and Noah on the other, Sophie holding a sign that she had made herself in purple marker that read, "Nurse Emily." Number 1 in a style that suggested she'd considered adding more text and decided simplicity was more powerful. Noah was holding a second sign. His said, "We knew you would," in letters that were slightly uneven because he'd done them freehand without rulers, which made them better. Emily stood at the edge of the auditorium entrance, in her graduation gown, holding her program, and looked at the people sitting in those rows. The people who had been present in the actual story. Not a curated version, not the highlight reel, but the real one with all its difficulty and wrong turns, and the sideways rain, and the $16, and the hard pharmacology tables, and the parking lot phone calls, and the cold tea in the flickering kitchen. She thought about the woman who had sat at the Delwood Avenue bus shelter and could not answer her daughter's question. That woman had been her, was still her in the ways that mattered, the ways that had made her who she was. She didn't want to be different from that woman. She wanted to be the place that woman had been heading all along. Dr. Lena Park called her name. She walked across the stage and shook hands and received the things she'd been working toward. And when she turned to face the room, she found her family in the front row, which was not a word she'd used casually for most of her adult life. Family, a word that had meant obligation and disappointment and complicated history, and discovered that it meant something entirely different when you'd built it yourself. From the people who had showed up and stayed, Sophie was waving both arms. Noah was holding the sign above his head. Ethan was not waving or holding anything. He was just looking at her the way he looked at her, the unguarded way, the way that said, "I see you, all of it, and I'm staying." She held that look for a moment. Then she looked at Sophie, who was going to be a nurse someday, or a diplomat, or both simultaneously. She looked at Noah, who was going to ask important questions at breakfast for the rest of his life and be right about most of them. She looked at Donna, who had told her to stop thinking and say the thing, which was the best advice she'd ever received. She looked at the room full of people who had, in their various ways, been part of the distance between that bus shelter and this stage. She thought about what she'd learned, not the pharmacology, not the clinical protocols, not the cross-reference methodology she'd finally cracked at 9:15 on a Thursday night with cold toast and a voice on the phone. She thought about the thing underneath all of it,